We examine tonight the concept of the earth as a vital schoolroom. Vital because we have here a basis for life. A schoolroom because the inhabitants of this earth in the main are not perfected beings in their expression. Many people have an inkling, but they do not perceive this at all times in themselves nor in others. Hence the schoolroom continues, and the purpose of God is served by the human schoolroom. This may illustrate or diagram for us why things are not perfect. However, there is an exception. They are already perfected in the case of the divine image within man. Every man has a matrix internally. This is like the pattern of a jewel, which is rough, unpolished, biased, and polarized, with many human concepts lingering now through the historical stream. For the stream of history clearly shows us, by the series of man-made wars and man-made discords, inharmonies, confusions, and all that we see in the world, that the imperfection of life is almost everywhere to be found. But we look within, and we see something within ourselves, occasionally, often, frequently, if we seek to meditate upon the grandeur of the Creator. But if we also pause to consider that we have a hand in the creation, and in reality we have a greater hand in the creation than we realize. For man is not a fixed creature in time, but he is mobile. He is movable, and as such, his memory sweep goes back to the beginning of time, to the beginning of what we call time, before he even existed as a physical entity. He is able to cognize many events through his internal outreach of memory. And as soon as a man realizes anything, it is already past. And so time is swiftly moving. And the future seems to be all that we have. Because the past, while it seems to be very sticky and refuses to go away, in other words, whatever we've done seems to remain with us always. At least man thinks it does because he remembers it. But in reality, transmutation of the past is possible. Transmutation is a fancy word for change. And change is a beautiful word when used as transmutation. Why? Because it really means more than just change. It means total change. It means the framing and building of a new body of experiences whereby the soul is no longer completely dominated by the experiences of the earth life, the struggle for food, existence, compatibility with his fellow men, the herd instinct of the common social conception of man. But he begins to realize that his survival is not dependent upon the intake of food and drink and education. It is not dependent upon the work experience. It is not dependent upon all kinds of pleasure experiences, because these come to almost all people. But somehow or other they're not satisfied with these experiences, because they know that there is greater potential possible to them in the schoolroom. And they know this is possible from within. No one has to tell them this. They sense it. But why don't all people sense it? Because all people are not seekers. All people do not seek for the divine experience. I think Dr. Richard Maurice Buck, in his book entitled Cosmic Consciousness, outlined many cases of what he termed cosmic consciousness. We should pause and understand then that Dr. Buck was a superintendent of the London, Ontario Asylum for the Insane. We should also understand that the borderline between sanity and insanity is extremely narrow. And I want to tell you something else. The borderline between humanity and divinity is also very narrow. We're not even really concerned with insanity, which is an abnormal state. But we want to indicate its abnormality and its narrowness of function, because there are times when man is extremely fatigued. According to the various books that have been written on the subject, we have learned that when man is tired, he has a tendency to drift over the border from the sane state to the insane. And this somehow or other can blend in with a montage of dreams. And these dreams are mingled reality and fantasy. And they have nothing to do with divinity whatsoever. And the sooner we realize that, the sooner we will begin the realization of the sane, balanced, clear, and beautiful aspect of our real divinity. But Dr. Buck had these experiences of passing opinions on many people because of his contacts. He made contacts with all types of people. And he named in his book Walt Whitman, the author of The Leaves of Grass, as one of those who had experienced cosmic consciousness. And an affinity with nature is a beginning of experience that, while it is not actually directly related to biblical injunctions, although the closest it comes is where Jesus said, "Consider the lilies of the field, they toil not, neither do they spin. Yet I say unto you, Solomon in all his glory was not arrayed like unto one of these." So we see the robes of nature are very, very beautiful. And they sort of flow, as in poetic cadences. They flow into our lives if we have a receptive mind and heart. Along comes the hunter that's after the deer and the sport of killing, and he says, "Poetry. Who cares about poetry?" He said, "What I care about is getting me a deer." And so we see all types of people on this earth. People who are in one level of experience, down in the sub-basements of life. Another we find are at the ground level, and some who are above. All of these levels are understandable. But we ourselves are fixed momentarily at one level or the other, yet we seek to understand God. And God is not really fixed. He goes all the way, runs the gamut, this whole spectrum of human ideas, and then goes beyond it all. And we try to understand this infinity with a finite mind. And the finite mind in the earth schoolroom experience finds it extremely difficult. Our work is to be an outpost of the Great White Brotherhood. As an outpost of the Great White Brotherhood, we have contact with the whole range of experiences that are available to man, and we are not limited. Our experience may go beyond the pale of ordinary men. Yet the Scriptures have clearly recorded that God is no respecter of men's persons. And so while God does not place one man above another, the real important factor here is that God has ordained as the inheritance of the elect and of every man the full range of divine experiences, having bequeathed this to us all. And what has He left to us? He has left to us everything. And the method and the will and the determination to change, the transmutation, the learning of the lessons are left entirely to us. When we are ready, the teacher appears, it's recorded. Well, not before. Some people today desire to bring people through force to the feet of Christ. This has been tried by Christianity because of its own Luciferian overshadowing. The devil has very definitely imposed into the fabric of Christianity the idea of forcing salvation upon man unwillingly, because the devil knows that by this method he can alienate man from God, and that's all that he wants to do. And he uses the tools of men that have lived in the past, like Cotton Mather with his hatred, his viciousness, and even some of the fiery thunder and brimstone preachers who scared people half to death that God was going to stick them on some kind of a pronged fork and burn them forever in some horrible hell of God's creation. A total contradiction of reality, because the hell is separation from God, and we are already partially separated. And there is no worse hell in the whole world than to be even partially separated from God. But yet we find ourselves there. And why do we come together? What is the purpose of trying to teach at all? Why should we teach in the schoolroom? Because the Scriptures clearly record that man is changed from glory unto glory, even as by the Spirit of the Lord. So, man then, desiring to contact God in the schoolroom, contacts God in many ways. Yes, he may contact God as spirit. He may contact God as the tremendous, passionful experience in his feeling world, where he is absolutely overwhelmed by divine love. He is inundated by it. Or he may contact God in the mind of Christ as the purity of experience, that somehow or other, gazing on all the husks of human experience, the husks of hatred, race hatred, human hatred against various people, war and destructivity, violence, stealing and crime of all kinds, finally recoils from all of this. He rushes back to himself and he says, I don't like this world. He says, I don't think this is the way it's supposed to be. And he's correct. It is not. Well, where would he retreat now? If he retreats to ordinary Christianity, which today is not the expression of the Christianity of the time of Christ, nor the expression of Jesus the Christ, nor of any of the other great masters, if he retreats that way, where does he go? He comes into a modern Christian club, where he hears preached to him the social gospel, that he is supposed to go out in the street here and parade around with placards and find his way into the kingdom of heaven by going out here into the streets of life and talking to people. Well, why don't he become a social worker? Just work for the city. Go out and do things in the ordinary human way. Why, he could accomplish a great deal. But what has happened then to the true mystery teachings of Jesus Christ? Why, the church simply doesn't know that they exist, and the preachers don't know that they exist, and the people, this is the most important thing, the people don't know that they exist. And so, there exist a few mystery schools upon this planet. Mystery schools founded by the Great White Brotherhood for the illumination of man under God. These mystery schools often find that one of the best ways they can actually contact man is to contact him through the initiatic experience, which means that we codify the teachings. And we say, we're going to give you 10 teachings, 10 expressions of God over here, and when you've completed these 10 teachings, You understand them and you obey them. Then we'll give you 10 powers. And then we move a little more forward in the next step. And we say, now we're going to give you 7 teachings. And when you complete these 7 teachings and you apply them, then we'll give you 7 powers. And we will tie your growth, your spiritual growth, to the powers we will give you. And so, step by step, the mystery schools take man up to the pinnacle of achievement. And the mystery schools are run by people under divine direction. And occasionally in the world, somebody has very faithfully represented them to humanity. And then all at once, the old man dies, you know. And the son comes along and he says, my, that's a pretty good thing Dad's got. And he forgets all about the brotherhood. And he decides that he's going to carry on, he's going to give these powers, and he's going to charge X number of dollars for them. What does the brotherhood say? The brotherhood says, freely ye have received, and freely you will give. Silver or gold we have not, but such as we have we gladly give. Because the teachings are not tethered to someone's idea of human fascination with dollar making. We are interested in people and what good we can do. And whatever we need, God supplies and gives to us, because people give to us of their own free will. I say this to you because there are so many mystery schools that have been perverted in the world. Fortunately, because we're not so old, no one has ever perverted us. And we express today the same original teachings that were given to us first. But we do not give everybody all of our teachings in one evening or 1 hour, nor do we attempt to do it in a year. It is a lifetime work. And we give as much as we can and as much as people are ready for on a given occasion. And they take as much of it as they can apply in their own world. We do not make promises and then not fulfill them. If we promise someone something, it is fulfilled, providing they keep their part of the bargain. And the bargain is actually with the law. And God is law manifest, and that's the only way you can bargain with God. You have to do it that way. You can't fool Him. You can't turn around and decide, well, I'll do this if you do that. It doesn't work. But what does work is the cosmic law that our teachings are based on. Now, recently a very strange thing has happened. The radio telescopes of the world have been turned on interstellar space. And we have suddenly seen new things that have not been seen before. We have had a lot of silly ideas in our mind. We have failed to recognize that consciousness itself is a quality of God, a quality, a universal quality that we borrow. We always figure, well, my consciousness is my own. And we do not recognize the fact that we have conditioned our own consciousness. I can guarantee you that if you're anything like I am, and I think everybody is pretty much alike basically, you start out with perception. You have eyes, ears, nose, mouth, and you assimilate food and knowledge all through life. Experience teaches you. And you finally come up with a little pack of knowledge on your back, a gnosis. An accumulation of knowledge and facts. Some right and some wrong. The only problem is, you probably, if you're like most of the world, do not have a discriminative faculty. And if you had a discriminative faculty that could actually tell you what is right and what is wrong in what you've taken in plenty, in a short time. If you had this discrimination, we couldn't even use the Broadmoor Arena every Sunday night. You couldn't use the football field or the Greyhound racetrack. You'd need every church in town and every public building in town, and you'd need a hookup of television between the buildings to try to convey it. And I'm telling you, the study would be fantastic. Why? Because of the reality that you would find in yourself. You have been defrauded. You have been robbed again and again and again of your divine birthright. By society and by habits in society. And by the fact that your perceptions are wrong. Scriptures say clearly, with all thy getting, get understanding. And people think they have understanding because they have a diploma. Well, most of our schools in this country, and I say from California to Maine, are taken over by professors trained in Moscow. Oh, they're not trained in Moscow, now are they? You scratch your head and you say, how can they all be trained in Moscow? Well, you don't have to be there in the physical form, because somebody was trained in Moscow. And so they decided a long time ago they wanted to take God out of the world. If they take God out of the world, they might as well take all the pleasure out of the universe, because there is no pleasure and no immortality. Without God, there can't be any immortality. And if there were no God, as one man said, it would be necessary for us to invent one. And this is true. But if there were no God, how would we even exist ourselves, and how would we need to invent one? Descartes said, I think, therefore I am. And obviously our mind did not originate entirely with itself. I've never heard of a mind that could create itself. I've never even heard of a computer that could put itself together. And the computer of the mind is so much more advanced than the sophisticated computers that are built by IBM, the itty-bitty machine company, that you just can't imagine. The computer of yourself. While you have more knowledge stored in one little neuron of your brain, you have more knowledge stored there than all the computers in the world. Because you have a sophistication that can beat your heart and adjust your blood pressure and control all your bodily functions and even react to people. Somebody pulls out in front of you. It's a woman driver. She doesn't know how to drive. Blow the horn at her. It's the idea. One man came along, driving his car. There was a woman ahead of him. And she couldn't go anyplace because there was a little old lady crossing the street right in front of her. And the lady had a cane. She was very slow getting across. So she couldn't start when the light changed. So the man behind her, he blew on the horn. So she got out of her car, came back and smiled very sweetly at him, and she said, well, she said, my car stalled while a little old lady was walking across the car in front of me, and she says, I can't get it going now. She said, if you will start my car for me, I'll go back here and lean on your horn. And that's the way people live. They live in an emotional world. And they react, and they have all the facilities within themselves to react to one another. In all the years we've lived on this planet, we haven't even followed the divine example of the golden rule. And we don't intend to. So we make more and more laws and restrict ourselves and hamper us all the time a little bit more than we've ever been hampered before. But we have some forces in this world amidst all of this amusement. And these forces are not really amusing. We're seeing the iron hand of this now, manifesting in Mr. Allende down in Chile. And it's enough to chilly your blood if you know what's going on. Because he's now starting his secret police activities in South America, the same as Mr. Castro started in Cuba. And he plans on extending it over here to America. taking away your freedom and mine. Well, you may say, "Preacher, why are you telling me about this? I thought this was a religious meeting, not a political one." Well, so it is. But if Mr. Allende has his way, there won't be any more religious meetings in America, because Mr. Allende would see to it that it failed to exist here any longer. We would all be liquidated. And so I think we should understand what is the true power behind all of the problems in our universities. You know, in the days of Henry Wadsworth Longfellow, we wrote about the village blacksmith. I think most of you have heard about him. The village blacksmith, and the spreading chestnut tree, and the New England fires that were burning in the grates in the wintertime, the chestnuts on the fires, and the sleighs that traveled across from house to house, and the lamp posts lit by gasoline and kerosene, the lamplighter coming along, and the little old slow pace before television, before our world shrunk. You've heard about that. And now we have electric lights, we have automated furnaces, we've done away with Jenny that sits at the bookkeeping desk and keeps the books. We have a little computer there with a black button. We push that and tape comes out and tells us exactly how much we're worth. And the stock exchange in New York gets all snarled up. The poor little computer with all of its sophistication can't keep up. Somebody gets robbed. Securities are missing. Nobody knows what happened to them. And the whole East Coast is more or less paralyzed with pornography. And drugs are in our high schools, and cigarettes are going down into the lower levels of the grade schools. And all kinds of things are happening. We ask ourselves, well, did God plan it this way? And we know very well He didn't. And somebody says, well, Grandma had long skirts. And there were a lot of immoral people in those days too. Not as many, dear hearts. And I'll tell you why from personal experience. When I went into World War II as a soldier of the United States, I found a bunch of boys that also were in there with me. They were sleeping in the same barracks, a lot of them, in the same camp. Down the road a little bit, there was what's known as a PX. It was called the beer PX. And Mr. Roosevelt had just done the country a real big favor. He'd returned to the whole United States freedom of beer and whiskey that could all flow once again without speakeasies. You know what the speakeasies were? They had a little door. They opened the door and they said, "Joe sent me." They closed the door. They came in, you see. And then they could have a glass of beer in secret. That made it all the more glamorous. But there was a lot of people that somehow or other never really knew anything about the delights of beer. They weren't too delighted with it because they'd never tasted it. So some of these kids got in the army and some of them were preachers' sons. And so here's a funny thing that happened, and I saw it happen. Boys began to go down to that PX that had never tasted beer before. They didn't stop with one or two or three. They had to be carried home. And pretty soon they were morally slipping too. And they were doing things that they would never have dreamed when they were a sweet little boy sitting in Sunday school that they would do. And then they were feeling guilty about it. And somebody, not in heaven, but in another region, decided that they would bring a little condemnation upon these people. And so they made them feel real bad and hang their head. And then they came along and they said, well, you've done all of this. You might as well keep on because you don't have a chance anyway. The guy said, I believe he's right. So they drank more. And they did more wrong things. And after a while their conscience was completely blunted. And they decided that there was no value whatsoever in being good. So they might as well be bad because being bad was the only thing they knew how to be now. And Mom and Dad didn't know them anymore. And so they felt awfully bad about it, and they got down on their knees, called prayer bones. And they started to pray. for their children who had now gone the wrong way very rapidly. Mr. Roosevelt sat in the White House playing the piano to Fala, his little puppy dog. And all these things happened. People began to wonder what in the world was wrong with everything. And then pretty soon, the war was over. And then another war came along. This time it was Korea. And then another war came along, and it was Vietnam. And then they had a few little episodes over in Czechoslovakia between the Russians and the Czechoslovakian people. And I was on the border of Czechoslovakia at the time, and I heard the screams of the men and the women and the children as the tanks were running over them. So I said to myself, well, war seems to be pretty universal. This seems to be an internal problem. I guess communism has all kinds of problems, not just America. And I said to myself, how can they run over those children? But they did. How can they run over women? But they did. How can they run over anybody? But they did. And the fact remained. And then along came the matter recently with Poland. And so we realized that there are forces in the world that are not really good for people. And we realize that probably no government except God's government is really good for people. So we have to be satisfied with a relative form of government. And that's what I think that flag stands for. It stands for the best government I've ever seen in the whole world, and I've covered most of the world. And I haven't been anywhere or talked to any people that have ever told me of a better government than we have right here. And yet that somehow or other seems to be pretty badly messed up at times between all the income taxes, the excess taxes, the double crosses, and all the things that are happening all over the United States, as they say, the New United States. That's what they say down in Lum and Abner country, you know. So we have problems everywhere. Like Cardinal Cushing said before he died, he said, troubles, who hasn't got troubles? So they've all got troubles, but they don't want them. Well, I can tell you that there is a way that you can start the process for yourself and thus for the world. Now, somehow or other, we've lost sight of the microcosm in this whole thing. We're thinking about the general trends in the nation, the general trends on the planetary body, and we have now seen pictures of this Earth from out in space taken by our own astronauts. We know it's a great big bubble floating around. It looks like you could easily spill part of it off very easy if you just turned it too fast. Somehow or other right now it's going awfully fast. I don't mean actually technically. I mean we're in a mad, mad whirl. And in this mad, mad whirl, in this great age of high technology, when our technology is far beyond anything that has ever before existed, we ask ourselves why we can't have enough common sense to get along with each other. And why we can't settle down to the business of discovering why we are here. Well, we know why we're here. This organization knows why. The only problem is that only a few other people know that we know. You know, there's that old statement, if a man knows not, and knows not that he knows not, he is a fool, shun him. If a man knows not, and knows that he knows not, he is a child, teach him. If a man knows and knows that he knows, he is a wise man, follow him. Well, somehow or other, I have long divorced myself from any achievement of this organization or any achievement of myself. I don't feel that my achievement or the organization's achievement is something that I want to brag about. Yet at the same time, I'm faced with this dilemma. How am I going to communicate with people and tell them what we have seen, what we have experienced, what we know? Oh yes, so we have the practical power. I know this. If we use this power individually on some person, And so we say to the man, here you are. You're standing on the ground here. We're going to use our power on you. We're going to elevate you 3 feet in the air. So the man rises up 3 feet in the air and he stands there. Looks down. Wonders how he got there. Decides that he must be dreaming. So you say to him, well, we're going to lower you down now. And you lower him down. He sits down in his chair. He says, well, that's quite an experience. I wonder how it's done with mirrors. What kind of a trick is this? 2 weeks later, he decides that it never happened. Why? Because the human mind is a tricky thing. Someone tells him that it never happened. It didn't happen. So he says, well, it never happened. First, he says, this is the way he does it in his mind. He says, well, that was quite an experience. And then he says, well, maybe it was hypnotism. Maybe I was really on the ground. And he says, do you suppose my mind was tricked in some way? And then he says, well, I'll bet you that was it. He says, no, that wouldn't happen. Nobody'd really do that. I'm too smart for that. I have a pretty rational mind. I'm pretty normal. I believe I'm a normal guy. Not me. That could never happen to me. No, I think it was kind of a dream. Well, still it was a real experience, though. I really had this experience. And he says, no, it must have been a figment because nobody else has it. Then he says, well, it didn't happen. He says, that's right, it didn't happen. And so finally he's got the whole thing down pat, and he says, no, it never happened. So you see, there is no value in convincing people by a demonstration of power. Jesus, you know, he broke the bread, a little boy, and he fed 5,000 people with it. He broke the fishes up and fed 5,000 people. He took up 12 baskets full. The modern theologians say that he never existed. Some of them. And so we have this to say that they still crucified him. He raised Lazarus from the dead. He was raised himself from the dead. He walked on the water. And they've got an excuse for all of that. The world, the modern world today, has an excuse for everything. They've rationalized all the teachings of Jesus Christ. Oh, there isn't anything they can't rationalize. So we can't do anything with demonstrations. Even if we can't convince anyone, and we won't. So the only way we have today is by the power of God. They have to be drawn by God himself, and they've got to recognize the flame in themselves. And once they get the understanding of the great mystery teachings of the Masters, once they learn how to demonstrate in their own world, in the microcosmic world, what is in the macrocosmic universe, and they bring that universe down inside of the dimension of their own consciousness, then their experiences are their best teachers. And their experiences will prove the rightness of all of this. They'll find out for themselves. And so, where we would like to have a bulldozer and just take the whole town of Colorado Springs and put them into a great amphitheater and say, well, here it is, folks. We have it all. We build a better mousetrap. Be the path to our door. We have to take it in increments. But then the mystery schools have always been this way. Because every master and every teacher and every lover of humanity from the time of the first lover of humanity has had no other way that he could reach people, because he has to go to the steps of their understanding. He has to speak their language. Consider the lilies of the field. They toil not, neither do they spin. Yet I say unto you, Solomon, in all his glory, was not arrayed like one of these. We recognize it. We understand. Now we understand that God loves us. We understand that it is the love of God that gave us the whole earth as a planetary home. We understand that it is the love of God that turns it, creating the diurnal movement of the earth, bringing us the seasons, the tides, the fullness of the sun and the moon, all the seasons, that makes the seeds grow in the earth, and provides man with nourishment for his physical body, and has also provided his own Son as the nourishment of our spiritual body. And who is his Son, and how do you spell it? S-U-N. It's S-U-N because we're talking about the Son of God, and the Son of God is the light of God. You read it in the Greek sometime. Read it and understand. Recognize the power of the Logos, the Word, and understand that it's been lost to man. It's been lost to man for generations and generations. And right while I'm talking to you, hundreds of fakers are talking all over India, are talking all over America and all over the world, telling people a bunch of baloney sausage. And they can't demonstrate a thing. Some of them can. We had one here a year ago. I think it was in October, last October. It'll soon be 2 years, and when we come to the October of 71, it'll be 2 years ago. And that man could stop his heart, cause the blood to flow on one side of his body. He could bring lightning down and break sticks. Several boys came up from Colorado College to watch him break sticks. And they went away, never to come again. They knew that it was real phenomena and quite entertaining. I suppose we could compare it with Marky the magician when he came to my hometown many years ago. But this man was an immoral man, a man with no character, a man who was a fraud and a deceiver. Well, how could he do all these things? Because I mean, all of us would like to know, how could he do it? Well, I can tell you how he did it. He was a disciple of an Indian master, and he practiced the mind disciplines that were taught by his master for the purposes of becoming a spiritually enlightened person. And if I take the letter Y and I put it up here in letters of fire in front of you, you see, at the very bottom of the Y, that's where you start out on the path. And you go up that path and you come to a fork in the road. It goes to the right and to the left. And the left-hand path means that by the time you get there, you've learned enough about how to control forces in the universe, so if you want to, you can control forces. Or you can go on to become godlike completely and become Christ-like. Well, he took the left-hand path. He chose that path of darkness. What does the Scripture say? They'll come to naught. Somewhere on that path, that left-handed side of the Y is going to just end. This one goes to you, the real you. God intended you to have all kinds of power, but he took the power away from man. Originally, man lived for almost 900 years. This silver cord from the heart of the presence of God down to the lower figure in the chart, to the human, was big enough that energy flowed down so that the cells of man were indoctrinated with magnetism. The magnetism was so powerful that whenever some little part of you got out of kilter because it twisted, it brought it magnetically right back again. You all worked, I think, with magnetic fluxes. You've seen how you can do with iron filings. That's the way it worked, scientifically. All that energy was coming down. So what did they turn around and do before the flood? They took human bodies and they blended them before the fiat with animals. And they had men running around here in the bodies of cows and goats, human heads on them. They had monstrosities on this planet. I've seen the Akashic records. Now in mythology, we have some of them still in existence on the mythological pages. People say, oh, that was a myth. It wasn't a myth. It was a condition that occurred on this earth before the flood. All these creatures ran around, and what was their purpose? Horses with women's heads and long hair, They actually started to fight with each other. They had battles. They take sides. They teamed up with armaments. And they had breastplates to protect them. And they had hands. They carried spears around, tried to kill each other with them. But the flood came and took them all, these monstrosities. And when the monstrosities were finished by the water, and they were all drowned, the whole bunch of them, many of them had human souls in them. You know what happened? The Akashic records clearly show it. God made a fiat. And he said, henceforth and forever, let each seed bear of its kind. And so from that time on, it became increasingly difficult in nature even to cross trees. But Luther Burbank, he was able to make a few tree grafts because he attuned with God. And he got permission from the karmic board of this planet, the board that governs all these actions, to create some of these grafts. But people, you don't see people half animal and half human wandering around, although sometimes you begin to wonder, just by looking at two-legged creatures. But you know in your own heart that the real mystery is in the teachings. And the teachings are not to be found in 1 hour for some human judgment to confound. We don't do it that way. We couldn't do it that way if we wanted to. It's impractical. I've sometimes yearned in meeting people. I've yearned in seeing the crowds on the streets and in the cathedrals of this country. I've yearned to gather them up and to carry them into the light. But what would be their first cry? Fanatic, idiot, confused person. There are none of us on this planet, and there are none of those we have taught, that are easily accepted by the multitudes simply because of the depth of the wisdom of God. It is not like it is told by most people. We tell it like it is because we understand it. And it's all by God's grace. Those who wish to pursue this course will do so. And if they don't, what happens? Well, they've done it before. They've accepted and they've rejected. And we don't expect people to accept unless their heart is magnetized by the divine love of God. We don't expect people to accept unless they're drawn to it. There is a big, broad road that leads in this world, the path of destruction. At the bottom of the cycle, they come back again, and they get another chance, and another, and another, and another. I always say, who wants it? Let's complete our course now in this schoolroom. Let's begin the process of learning the high mysteries. Let's understand ourselves. Let's recognize what God is. There is an impersonal God, and there is a personal God. Too many people have an anthropomorphic God. Do you know what that means? An anthropomorphic God means a God made in your own image. You have a concept up here of what God is. And then finally, after a while, your concept changes. So you go over here to another image. Then you say, well, that didn't exist. How do I know this one exists? Well, neither one of them are any good, in most cases. An anthropomorphic God is simply your concept of what God is. God is bigger than all of us on the planet. And He's far beyond the passion of wanting to be worshipped for the sake of sweet worship. The only reason God even wants man to attune with Him is so He can give him something. You can't even stick a drinking straw in a glass and have it plugged and draw water through it. You have to have a straw that's open. And if you put the straw over here into a sand pile, you're not going to draw water up it. Just because you have a concept isn't going to do anything. You have to put your straw where the joy is, where the light is, where the power is. You have a lot more to say about what's going to happen to you than you realize. You have everything to say, you know? I just wanted to touch on these things tonight. I have no intention of pursuing it any further. We will sing 187, The Tree of Life. You may stand for this song.